All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this show on the road. Hello, I am Jimmy Ruffian, and you are watching The Rough Report from live in downtown Toronto. As you can see, I got a new background. Isn't that fun? It looks a little more sensible now for a podcast. It's not just like some of my bedroom shit. I'm gonna decorate it somehow, I think. So thank you for joining me. We're going to be talking about what's been going on in Colombia a little bit, and a little bit of the history of what's going on there and why that's important. Of course, we're going to be talking about something that's been heavy in the news recently in other international affairs, and that's Israel. For a lot of people, it's not the most comfortable subject, but I think war and genocide rarely is a comfortable subject. But we're going to be trying to cut through some of the fog there and get to the meat of what this situation is, and hopefully be able to educate and clarify things for a few people. And this is all going to relate back to a greater point I was speaking on in sort of like the Instagram story promo I was doing for this episode, and talking about how my analysis personally usually begins with and is centered around the concept of power and who is operating what kind of influence in a given hierarchy, and what that means and how that affects people. Because all of this sort of stuff relates back to those power dynamics. All right, so thank you once again. Let me get this music off. Thank you once again for tuning into the Rough Report, May 27th. It's been a couple weeks since we were off. Quite frankly, I just didn't have the energy to do it. Was working on a lot of music stuff, which it's coming near an end. I think I'm in the sort of final stretches of what was going on there. So some new music is coming out soon. I've been taking a long time to produce it, and quite frankly, get better at producing. I'm pretty inexperienced at it, all in all, before this whole COVID thing. So it's been a lot of work to get it to where I want it to be. Had a bit of this written down, but again, I mentioned this. If you watch the promo that I did in the social media stories for this episode, you would have seen this. But to kind of put this episode in context, and a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in context, basically, I find it strange that other people find it strange that when you take the time to understand a certain political position and having a strong opinion on it, and just having a system of ethics and beliefs regarding this in of itself sets off this sort of lizard brain response for a lot of people where, who are you to tell me what's good? Who are you to tell me how to live? Who are you to tell me, what good looks like? And I can totally understand why, in a certain extent, why somebody might get their backs up about that. But, for me, it's that I don't really know what is good, or I don't know if there is an objective good to be had, quite frankly. But what I do know is that there is a material difference to people that makes a difference in their lives, in their quality of life. And I am going to argue in favor of making those differences. And the basis of this is rooted in understanding those power dynamics. Who influences who, how and why, and to whose benefit. And my analysis begins there and kind of travels through that vein. So, to expand a bit further on that, if you're going to wonder things like, why do you hate billionaires like Musk, Gates, Bezos so much? Well, it's because they have a concentration of power that is undue to them, and that power allows them to further subjugate the people that they were able to subjugate in order to gain the power that they have. So when analyzing this through the lens of that sort of materialist philosophy, that who has what and what are they doing with it to what ends, and how that behavior is influenced by their class, it leads one to question why any person should have that kind of influence over another person, where I own the means of production, to put it in a way that will make a lot of people unfortunately roll their eyes, but that is the nature of it. I, the person who owns the materials, owns the factory, owns the means to produce, need people to operate those machines. And because I have more wealth and power, I am able to coerce you into working for me for a wage that is less than. And I am going to extract profits off of your labor and create a further unbalance in a class system. So, yeah, that's how I tend to analyze these things. That's the lens that I'm viewing it through, because that's what makes a material difference to people. That's what it comes down to. And so, when you were talking about, many people will be familiar with about 10 or so years ago, a little more, during the Occupy Wall Street movement, and, what people were fighting for during that time, and what led to, the strong socialist positions of the Bernie Sanders campaign, or, strong socialist positions, at least as far as American standards are concerned. What led to that? That time in American history was centered around, and still largely is, just focused in probably a lot more social issues than economic, in terms of a lot of the protest and collective action you've been seeing recently. But, you were seeing massive amounts of people and a big name politician later on in very nearly successful campaigns. Successful as in, resulting in an election, without getting into too many details there. But, you had all this centering around, socialistic policy, like furthering workers' rights, heightening wages, especially the lowest wages, giving further rights for people to be able to, organize and unionize as workers, and, having a universal basic income. And, the list goes on. And this is essentially what you're seeing in Colombia right now, in regards to basically there's been about a month of widespread protests and march on capitals demanding social change. And a lot of this was centered around police brutality. They're essentially a national riot police that they have, a militaristic national organization that in Spanish is ESMAD, ESMAD, but in English the acronym translates to the Mobile Anti-Disturbance Squadron. So if that sounds, if that's hitting your ears going, that sounds kind of fucked up, well, it is. You're not wrong to assume that it's fucked up. We're going to be getting a little more into ESMAD in a moment. But basically, yeah, what they're asking for is to the disbanding of ASMAD. So, abolition of this particular police, universal basic income, and, that type of social change, the type of social change that can alter a society into a more socialistic direction, which is something that has been strongly opposed by Colombia. And it's been, there are revolutionary leftist organizations that exist in Colombia that have been fighting for social change for a long time. And, it has an ongoing history with the U.S. Sorry, my mouth is getting dry. One thing you'll notice if you spend any time studying South American history for the past 100 years, 150 years, there is a repeated pattern of something that you'll notice, especially since the inception of the CIA, is that their activity in South America is to further American imperialism via corporations and actively resisting leftist ideals and continuing the Red Scare and continuing the anti-communism movement. They've thrown coups throughout several South American countries. You do not have to look far to find this information, and how American corporations like Coca-Cola were tied to throwing labor organizers out of helicopters, like having mercenaries come in and kill these people on behalf of corporations. This is easily verifiable fact. It's not just, I'm not spouting some wacky conspiracy about the CIA. This is stuff you can easily find out about. It is readily available information. So the fact that this sort of stuff is going on in Colombia should not be surprising. But one of the things about the ongoing relationship, particularly between Colombia and the United States, is in 1999 when Bill Clinton trained Colombian forces as part of a U.S. foreign aid initiative known as Plan Colombia to essentially create ESMAD, the Mobile Anti-Disturbance Squadron, this national riot police that essentially has been coming in to peaceful protests and like literally peaceful protests, and beating the hell out of people and being extremely violent to silence political dissent. And I'll have you know, by the way, the current president of Colombia, Ivan Duque, I think is how you pronounce it. I hope I'm not saying that wrong. He is essentially, he belongs to the Democratic Center. He is what, Joe Biden would be in a Colombian equivalent. And he is using national police to silence dissent, and it's really disturbing fascistic stuff. And it's been, and the widespread protest has been going on for a month. Just to show you some idea of what's going on here. This is what essentially has been going on for a month, but has been recently coming to a head. Here, let me make this full screen. Let's do the big screen thing. There we go. I think the only reason the police aren't being particularly brutal here is that they're pretty outnumbered. in that situation. Not entirely bad. Colombians got balls, man. I'll give them that. Gotta hand it to him for that.
He dado instrucciones muy precisas.
Yeah, precise instructions to the military and police, basically to disband people at whatever means necessary. So yeah, and this was all brought on in the Bill Clinton era through that initiative of Plan Colombia to train police in the model of American police and further this model of white supremacy, even though largely in the United States and Canada we would probably regard South Americans as not white. But in the context, Ivan is a white Colombian, essentially. So yeah, a lot of complicated history surrounding specifically SMAD and the United States imperialism, and it's specifically to continue the war on drugs, which again is a continuation of white supremacy via subjugation of black people in the United States, in Colombia. It has so many multifacets that are convenient to the white, wealthy hegemony that has a specific interest in making sure socialistic policy that could give poor people a chance at having a quality of life, at giving working people a chance to advance in the economy. Anything of that kind that could lift poverty and make a difference, to a material difference to massive amounts of people in a much more ethical way than how these countries are currently doing it. They will resist that tooth and nail to continue this unbalance of power, as they seem to truly psychopathically believe that it's good and right. Yeah. So let me know if you're in the live chat here. By the way, I know it seems like a couple people are watching. If you're here, chime in. Let me know what you think. Had a quote written here, as James Baldwin said in 1971, "A cop is a cop," and that's more and more true when you read into the fact that these cops in Colombia were trained under a very American model, directly funded and influenced to do so. So, yeah. Go back to that. So, yeah. And this all ties into, like, again, these power structures. Who has the power and to what ends are they using it? When people have a concentrated amount of power and an undue amount of privilege, they tend to see what they're doing and why they have more as being good and right. Kind of a fundamental bias, if you will. It's like what bias is. It's like the epitome of bias is that this directly benefits me, therefore it is good. And people who don't like that are the bad people. That it's I don't know how you can make it more black and white than that, right? And that's kind of the outward look of the behavior that you're seeing in this imperialistic hegemony throughout the United States, South America. The things that all the people are fighting for are rather consistently the same. And what the tactics that are used to suppress them, and the history that those tactics have are largely the same. Yeah, you're watching on YouTube tonight. I actually prefer if you watch it on YouTube. YouTube is the better source to watch the Rough Report. Because screw Facebook. That's why. I don't know why. One could easily make an argument about why they're equally bad. Facebook is trash, YouTube is trash, whatever. Not going to get in that circle. But how I feel about it right now is YouTube is better than Facebook to watch me. Watch the show, not just me. Even though that kind of is the show, I guess. Shut up. All right. So, I'd like to thank one of my viewers. Who was it again that made this suggestion to talk about Colombia? Somebody. Oh, yeah. Peppa. If that is your real name. I don't know. You could be using a Facebook fake name. But, yeah. She suggested talking about the Colombia strike. And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea because it shows it's an example of how hegemonic this problem is, and that where you see American influence taking place and where you see these dynamics of power really playing out in their most obvious forms, you get this consistent result that it becomes harder and harder to deny that there's a fundamental problem in the free market and capitalist model, that it always seems to collapse in on itself in the exact same way, which is ironically the arguments that you commonly hear against socialism and communism. And to which, the very common reply is, true socialism and true communism has never truly been achieved. And, the other person always laughs or something like, oh, isn't that convenient? And then round and round the conversation goes, and a lot of important other facets to this get ignored. And while to an extent it is absolutely true that, your ideal form of communism or socialism has never been fully realized. And there's a bit of validity to, your anti-communist argument about how when, people come into concentrations of power, they don't want to give it up. Isn't that funny? Isn't that what the leftist argument is against people having concentrations of wealth and the power and influence that leads to in the exact same way? So, of course, there's a bit of legitimacy to the idea of, criticizing the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat, because are they ever going to give that back to the proletariat? That's a worthy question of asking. That's a worthy, and only because I believe if we face it honestly and unpack it, you can come to better conclusions about how to mitigate that possibility and further a healthy democracy within a socialistic system. But again, we have to face the legitimate criticisms honestly. And I think, at least for a lot of the chatter that you get online and amongst the majority of people, you don't really get to that, right? And then on top of that, socialistic policy is very difficult to get into play and get and hold on to, because if you haven't been paying attention to the rest of the episode, you have the world's wealthiest and largest superpowers doing every sneaky, backhanded, disgusting, grotesque, human rights violating act that can possibly be imagined, in order to make sure that any socialist system or communist system will not be successful. When you have an enemy that powerful and that determined and that unscrupulous in their actions to get something that is based on goodness and fairness off the ground, essentially becomes an extremely difficult task. It's not so much that there's something wrong with that system. It's that the system has been successfully repressed by things that have concentrations of undue power. That is an important thing to know. So it's a worthy question, like, can we reach the socialist ideal or the communist ideal without getting trapped in these pitfalls? Well, that's the ongoing question in it. Because one thing is for sure, the ongoing pitfalls of capitalism are continuing to harm people. It's being continued to be responded with escalating fascistic violence from governments against the people, as you can plainly see in Colombia here. And further damage to the environment, which is actually a big part of these Colombia protests as well. And a lot of violence on behalf of ESMAD has been committed against the environmental protesters. So, yeah, it's a pretty disheartening and discouraging thing that you see going on as an ongoing problem. But that's the fight. And Colombia is fighting right now, and we should be paying attention to that and thinking about that. And being conscious of it will help you to realize how consistent a problem this is, and how the system of American imperialism and neoliberal capitalist hegemony as a world order, and how it has been for the past 400 years or more. It's just constantly bombarding people with oppression, and because you don't feel that oppression or you don't think it's that bad, I mean, it doesn't make it so. Stockholm syndrome is a thing. I don't want to talk a great amount on Israel in the Palestinian conflict, in that I think people have been beat over the head with it quite a bit over the past couple weeks that I haven't been doing the show. So, to sort of paraphrase or put in my own words, something that the late Michael Brooks said was basically, like, you commonly hear the thing in regards to the Israel-Palestine conflict that it's complicated. And that's the thing. It's not complicated. It's rather simple. You have the most powerful country in the region, being Israel, in the Middle East, backed by the most powerful and wealthy country in the world, the United States. And powerful, most certainly in ostensible military might. Committing human rights violations and blowing up civilian targets and killing people en masse in Palestine, a country that does not have any of this power, and not nearly. There is no symmetry in this relationship. When you're talking about Palestine versus Israel, you're talking about, what an ant is to a boot. There is a massive difference in power here. You can plainly see it here. And what has happened over the years, like when you're trying to talk about, oh, Israel just wants a proper two-state solution, and then you look at how civilian targets have been brutalized, and civilians have been lives have been destroyed, and Palestine has been destroyed. And then, to pretend there's a balance in this relationship with Hamas when Israel has, all the greatest defense weapon systems, and Hamas is basically firing rockets that were put together with duct tape and a little bit of elbow grease, and talking about like that these threats are equal to each other. Like, I'm not defending the idea of Hamas, because, the common argument that you hear against Hamas is that they want to fundamentally, kill all Zionists and, kind of have this declaration of genocidal intent to themselves. But, just because President Netanyahu of Israel doesn't put it in those words doesn't mean every action that Israel's taken throughout this time has resulted in a genocide, has resulted in the apartheid state, has resulted in zero intention in to do a proper solution. And oh, sorry, I just got distracted by my phone there. Yeah, just because Netanyahu doesn't say it in the mean words, and he says it in a little nicer a context, but over the decades the actions speak the same, you end up with the same result. It's genocide, it's apartheid. There's really no question about it. You can't look at this map and say and look at this relationship and this dynamic between two completely different levels of power and influence and say that this conflict is equally bad on both parts. And not to mention, Hamas would have zero justification to exist, in zero, or at least much closer to zero, influence in Palestinian society if Palestinian civilians were not suffering so much. Israel is the antagonist of this fight, and there's no question about it. The imbalance of power tells you as much. And that's basically all there is to it. It's going back to a massive imbalance of power. And you're going to hear all the pro-Israeli propaganda and word twisting to justify how the IDF plainly and admittedly destroys civilian targets and thinks it's okay. I was just reading about an incident where they blew up an important radio station or communications point, and the owner of the building was begging Israel to just give them 10 more minutes to get some vital equipment out. Because the excuse that Israel had to say they were going to blow up this civilian building is that one floor or one office in it was hiding something important of Hamas, and thus they were going to blow it up. Level this entire building important to the infrastructure of the Palestinian people to get a small target against a terrorist threat that is not nearly the level of threat that Israel is obviously giving to the Palestinian people down here. I don't know. You could get in a lot more nuance about the history of this situation, and how it's come to this and all that. But that's the bare bones of it. That's really, in my opinion, all you really need to know when you look at this is that there is a severe imbalance of power where one superpower is just crushing another population with total impunity and total lack of accountability. And it just has to stop. And it can only stop with the power. Like, Israel has a right to defend itself. Defend itself against what? Look what they've done. Defend itself against what? It's bonkers. It's bonkers. And furthermore, to say that any criticism of Israel amounts to anti-Semitism is to say that the actions of Israel is tantamount and equal to Jewishness, which in itself is anti-Semitic. And this is the very argument that's been brought up by several prominent Jewish intellectuals. Of course, with direct relatives that died in the Holocaust, as most of them had. That is, direct relatives there. So it's just a nonsense argument, and really you're hearing it said less and less for good reason, because it just doesn't hold water with people anymore. These excuses just don't hold water, and it's getting more and more popular to question the narrative that we've been fed about Israel through American politicians mostly, and their mainstream media, as funded by the lobby groups that are interested in maintaining this. How y'all doing out there? All right, I'm going to go to a little bit of a different subject here. Hamilton needs room to grow and build, by Mike Collins Williams. This contributor's opinion piece in the Hamilton Spectator here from Hamilton, Ontario, about how, we need to protect the greenbelt space, but we need to give Hamilton the room to grow, and we can't have politicians saying thumbs down to that, and we need to be able to continue urban sprawl. It's very funny that he's this very pro-development position, because if you go down to the bottom of the screen here, I'm just going to highlight it before I throw it up on the screen for you. If you can see it there, Mike Collins Williams is CEO of the West End Home Builders Association. Isn't that nice? Isn't that neat? Oop. Went to the wrong screen there. At least once an episode I do that, once a live stream. So yeah, basically this privileged schmuck is basically going on about, screw the land, screw the ecosystem. We need to have a more market-based approach. And it's the market-based approach that has led to this housing crisis in the first place. So again, I have to relate this to the ongoing theme here about the balances of power, that this guy is able to write this article and have this influence and have this platform and position to spout his nonsense, and talk about how the very system that has led to this problem that he has benefited from, well, we should just keep doing it. That will surely solve the issue of people not being able to afford homes. It's not that the housing costs are super inflated and that the market is a ridiculous caricature of itself. No, couldn't possibly be that. We need to just keep doing it more. Like, how many empty properties exist? How many places could be renovated and brought up to code to be affordable housing for people. And it's just a matter of they don't see profit in it. It's that you come back to the imperial capitalist hegemony and the power that it has and the influence that it grips around the world. You know, as I think it was Ursula Le Guin said, we live in capitalism and its power seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings. And, that eventually ended, so maybe. Yeah. He's going on and on in this article about how people from the outside cities started moving to Hamilton. Now Hamilton's inflated again. Last I looked at living in Hamilton, it was just as expensive, if not more, than here in Toronto, which seems wild, but that is the case. Housing in this country is unbelievably expensive, and it's due to having a broken capitalistic system around it. We have made it not profitable or made it not reasonable to see people homed in favor of this ridiculous market. I don't know how else to put it. It is ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. When we can recognize in raw numbers that, a person shouldn't be spending 40% of their income on just their housing alone, but yet that's what happens. Yet that's what we do here in Canada and have been doing it for at least a couple decades. We recognize that it's a problem, yet it just keeps on going. That's why I look at these things first and foremost through the lens of power and influence, and criticizing that power and influence, and talking about how we can level that power and influence and reduce its grip on society to a greater democracy and an opening up to something that's more beneficial and in the interests of the people. Simple as that. And I guess to cap it off, because I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to say in this episode, to cap it off, COVID numbers are way down, which is great news. Canada has been getting on that vaccination game and vaccinating people en masse. So here in Ontario, our numbers have been going way down. Let me see if I can actually quickly pull some of that up for you. Sorry, bear with me a moment. But they are way down. I don't know. Have you guys heard the numbers? We got really good numbers. Look at all these numbers. Sorry, it's probably because I'm doing the stream and it's slowing down the internet on my computer, but it's getting really hard. Ontario, May 27th update, 1135 new cases, 2,302 recoveries, 19 deaths. 19 deaths still seems actually pretty high. 37,705 tests. But this is way down. 65.2% of adults at least one dose vaccinated. Fantastic. My second vaccination is mid-late August, I think. I'll be getting my second Pfizer. So this is good news. It feels like legitimately there is some light at the end of the tunnel to this COVID thing. So let's look forward to doing that thing. But of course, can't let you go without reminding you that Doug Ford's incompetence helped fuel, not only helped, but greatly influenced the problem with spread in Ontario, and that the greatest point of spread was the workplace. In that, even if you had like the numbers accumulated through anti-maskers alone and their stupid activities or people just being irresponsible, is not nearly the amount of spread that came from the workplace. The number one problem was the workplace. I understand it is this human instinct to want to get mad at all those ridiculous people out there, and mind you, they are ridiculous and they are irresponsible. But the crux of this thing is that it is not your neighbor and that stupid guy who is the major problem here. It is sorry, I just started thinking of something and I wanted to pull it up, and I wasn't expecting to go there, but maybe I will. Basically, that Chris Sky guy who was the big anti-masker, well, you know, he was like searched and arrested, and he had all kinds of drugs on him, like lots of meth and stuff like that. And just the commentary I could go into regarding that, maybe I'll save that for next episode. How about that? That's what we'll do. But anyway, yeah, it was the workplace and the fact that we didn't have paid sick days, and a true effort to get people to legitimately stay home, not go on public transit. Like, if anybody saw any pictures or experience on the TTC here in Toronto going to and from work under a lockdown, it was suspiciously packed, right? And you know it's because people had to go to work. And how else are they going to get there? That's what this comes down to. And don't let anybody fool you otherwise. Don't take your eye off the prize here. There is a specific subset of policy failures brought on by a specific set of people that are responsible for how badly this thing has gone. And we should not forget it. Anyway, this has been the Rough Report. Rough as always. I am Jimmy Ruffian signing off. Stay rough, kids.